Hello again. When I released a video a few days ago, which I remarked that many people notice that their colleagues at work who are black do not seem to be as able, articulate, or bright as they are themselves, there were predictable howls of outrage. How dare I say such a horrible thing? The reason I said it, of course, is because not only is it true, it is demonstrably and measurably so. The best way of understanding this is to look at the situation in the United States. It will be observed that in that country, black people occupy many important roles in the police, the armed forces, the civil service, industry, most aspects of employment, in fact. Some people have also noticed that these high-ranking individuals appear noticeably less able than their white colleagues, those on the same pay grade, so to speak. And there is an excellent reason for this state of affairs. It is because almost all those black workers are not as intellectually able as their colleagues. This tells us incidentally nothing at all about the average intelligence of either black people or white, but does reveal a most interesting piece of social engineering which began in the 1970s. In May and June 2021, a scandal hit the headlines in the United States over what is sometimes known as race norming. This is the practice of adding to the score which black people achieve on aptitude tests in order to make them appear more suitable for a job requiring intelligence and certain abilities, and also subtracting marks from those of East Asian origin to reduce their score until it is more in line with those achieved by black people. This sounds, as indeed it is, quite appalling, but it is a system which has been used for decades in America and was throughout the 1980s operated by the federal government without too many people knowing about it. In the description to this video I give links to two articles about this business, one from when the scandal broke in 2021 and another from Newsweek about 35 years ago. One of the targets towards which both education and employment in Britain and the United States is geared today is racial balancing. This is seldom explicitly stated because such an enterprise is of dubious legality. Instead, all manner of euphemisms are used to obscure what is being done. An organisation which employs many people will make a pious and vague-sounding statement to the effect that they wish their workforce to reflect the community which they serve. In straightforward terms, this means that if 15% of the community, or perhaps country as a whole, belong to visible minorities, then the aim will be to ensure that 15% of their employees also belong to visible ethnic minorities. In the late 1970s, some clever people in the United States came up with what looked like a surefire method for helping black people into the same jobs which whites seemed to monopolize. Since black people didn't do very well on aptitude tests and IQ tests, then this must, or so it was argued, be a product of the racial prejudice to which they were subjected and also connected with the poor living conditions, inferior schools and lower standards of health which bedeviled them. It would only be fair, given all this, if a few points were added to their scores when aptitude tests were being taken to assess their suitability for various kinds of employment. Unless this is done, black people trail behind in aptitude tests of all kinds, which are looking for certain levels of cognitive ability. This is simply what happens if you just administer aptitude tests or IQ tests to mixed populations. Those whose families have their roots in Asia come out at the top, while people of African heritage tend to congregate at the bottom. Nobody has ever been keen to call this fiddling of the data by its correct name. The commonest expression used was race norming, but experts in the field were a little more cagey, referring instead to within group score conversion or score adjustment strategy. This was to disguise the nature of what was being done and to conceal both from applicants and potential employers what was going on. It was simple enough. The General Aptitude Test Battery, or GATB, was a government employment exam taken not only in public services but also used by private companies. Applicants for jobs were tested and the scores calculated by people who were in on the racket. Chinese applicants had their scores arbitrarily reduced, while the scores of black people were enhanced. This was done by comparing the scores of a black person with other black people rather than the general population, and doing the same with applicants of East Asian origin. Employers were not told what was being done. As if by magic, companies and public agencies found that the ethnicity of their workforce began to mirror the percentages of different minorities in the population as a whole. Another popular aptitude test, the Wonderlic test, was produced in the 1970s by a company in Illinois called the EF Wonderlic Personnel Testing. The results of this test were processed through ethnic conversion tables, which added points to the score of black people and took them off when Asian applicants were tested. Employers consequently found during the 1970s and 1980s that they were employing men who were not really capable of doing the jobs for which they had been hired. It was unfortunately the case that most of these men were black. They had been assessed for specific jobs, and their scores had indicated they were not really suitable for some jobs for which they had applied. This fact was concealed, though, from the potential employers, and it was represented to them that the black applicant had scored more highly than was actually the case. This created a poor impression of the abilities of black workers in the offices and factories where they worked. They struggled to do their jobs, and this was noticeable to fellow workers who were white or of East Asian heritage. The impression gained by those working with them that these people were not really capable of performing to the same level of other ethnicities. In short, white workers realized that those who had been appointed to the same level as them were not actually bright enough to do the job. This was because a white man who might have scored, say, 80 on some aptitude test was working alongside a black man who had only scored 60. Since sacking or demoting these poorly qualified workers would have caused an outcry and accusations of racism, they remained and were even promoted in the name of equality. This accounts in large measure for the number of black people in high positions in the United States. The system in Britain is similar but managed more subtly, and I think I shall have to make a separate video on this matter. When white people observe that a black colleague who is on the same level and pay grade as them is not really as intellectually able, this is not racial prejudice, but rather a sober fact, caused by fiddling the figures in the outrageous way which I have described. There's no point complaining about me when I draw attention to this kind of thing. I am describing the world as it exists, not some ideal platonic realm where everything is done fairly.